Okay. I won't have time to go over the entire Morris chart discussion. I just am going to introduce the main points. Also, this particular chart is a line chart. There are other types of Morris charts as well, and I believe, well, I've only been exploring Morris charts because when I was looking up visualization for creating this, what we were discussing in class, the view components and a dashboard. So if you remember how we started off with the dashboard discussion, we started with view components, which sort of give you a partial view. And then I said, well, now let's look at some visualization to add on to the dashboard in addition to the summary, and that's my exploration led me to Morris charts. There might be other forms of visualization as well, which I haven't explored. If any of you come across something that you find interesting, please let me know. Okay. Again, I'm not going to do this discussion from scratch, where I write the code, but I just don't have the time right now to do that. But for the groups who have been exploring using Morris charts on your projects, I wanted to sort of point out the main aspects of how you get this to work, or at least where I found potential problem areas. I will rediscuss this in class on Tuesday, going over the code. So anyways, let me get to those main points that I had mentioned. So let's start with the big picture first. Course offering class. You have to add properties. So hopefully you've done that by now, capacity and enrollment. If you have not, well, you should add those two properties. And whenever you add properties, well, these two are the properties that I added. So, and I've told you many times, the best way to incorporate any changes would be to revert your migration back to 0, add a new migration, and then update the database, right? So those three steps, when you're doing this, please follow. Hopefully you've already done it. And then when I'm populating, I just went ahead and added these two properties to the course offering objects that I had already created. Okay, so I went in and added the properties. I used the constructor. I didn't so I didn't create. If you see, I didn't add it to the constructor because then I would have to have had this. And so I sort of did it with the minimal amount of additional work. So initially, like if you go through my previous recording for course, where I added in course credits, and you could see that the default value that was set was 0, since it's an integer. So when the course offering is created, it would have a default value of 0 for capacity and enrollment, and then gets updated to 4520 for this particular course offering. Okay, so anyway, so that's the first part, creating the two new properties, capacity and enrollment, and then populating them. Okay, then the other components are remember this is a part of the view component. So we created a course summary view model, and in the course summary view model, after you add capacity and enrollment properties, the number of courses that are at capacity. I think initially I put these two properties of the view model. I think I looked at it and the changes. I was sort of doing it in a hurry at the end of one of the classes, but you want these two number of courses at capacity, which is I gave. So how do we decide capacity? It's either 100% or close to capacity. 90% is the cutoff that I used. So any course that is at 90% or greater enrollment compared to the capacity is a course at capacity, and below capacity, or in this case significantly below capacity, I took as any course that is at 50% or below. Okay, so that's the sort of the first big picture view with the view model, and from the view model it's the view component, and the view component is course summary. Okay, so in course summary I have gone in and applied or implemented the logic that I just discussed. 90%, so the enrollment should be at 90% or greater of the capacity, which is what I've done here, 0.9 times whatever the capacity is. And number of courses below capacity is enrollment at 50% or less of the capacity. Okay, so that is the view component, or summary view component. And remember that we created a separate folder for view components, and from there we need the view. And remember, because we are going to use this ultimately we are setting up our dashboard on the index of the home page. We are setting up our components inside of the home directly under views. Okay, so home components, and in this case course summary default dot cshtml, and that's where I put courses at or near capacity greater than or equal to 90% as the label. I get from the view model. Remember, I am referencing the course summary view model in this view. Okay, and similarly number of courses below capacity, and then I have the link to the course offerings, and then finally this is where I put the chart. And it's important to know what you're giving as the identifier for this div tag. In this case I called it ID chart, and then I've given some space, sufficient amount of space. 250 pixels is the height that I've given to display the chart. Also, I need a reference to all these scripts, the Ajax scripts, and also the Morris chart scripts. So you can see Morris.css, Morris.mini. I think it's minimized version of the JavaScript library from Morris. And I think somebody, Raphael, had built on the Morris chart. So this is the entire library of JavaScript that we are referring to. I have posted these three script sources. Obviously, these are all URLs, and the style sheet link is also on this websites, so we are referencing them. Dane was saying we should probably download and set it up in our own project, so that way, if for some reason these sites are not available, then our application would crash. So to prevent that from happening, we should get these scripts and put them in our the place we want to put them is under www.root, under JS for the JavaScript files, and then CSS would go in this folder. Okay, so these are the 4 references, and as I said, I have posted it under class projects, Morris chart scripts, to include actually 3 are scripts, and the 4th is a style sheet. It's posted on eCampus under class projects. Okay, and the last part of the view component is, of course, going to we need to be in views, home, components. Well, this is the default. Well, all of this is for getting to the default, but the final place where we are having our dashboard is the index, and this is where we are invoking the course summary and the changes summary. Okay, so that's as far as the view component. So now let's go to to what's required for the chart itself. The 3 main pieces, well, of what you need for the chart. The first one I said was where you want to display it, and in this case, well, we are displaying it on the index in the dashboard, but it comes through default CSHTML, and I've set up a table row, and within that a div which has the ID of chart. So when we are wanting to display it, we need this particular ID. So you have to be it is very specific. It has to conform, otherwise the connection doesn't get made. Okay, so that's one piece. The second piece is going to be our JSON. So I want to go to my manual course controller, because this is going to be a list of courses that I'm pulling up. So I call this get courses data for chart. What is getting returned is a string. Leanne had asked why there was a session which says set string. So essentially with JSON, we are dealing with strings. JSON JavaScript object notation is essentially a set of strings using a particular name value format. So you have a name and then an associated value. So, but they're all coming as strings, which is what makes it easy to move around and use across different applications and so on. So it sort of makes it a universal standard for data exchange. If it was some more complex data type, then it would be very hard to sort of move data from one application, give it to another, and then for that to be able to interpret what that data actually holds. So anyway, so coming back, I've called this get courses data for chart, and this is very much like the JSON that we created for the drop down and for the checkbox list. If you remember, we had basically get courses. So this is very similar to that, except that there are these additional two columns, capacity and enrollment. And then I'm going to have, so for the x-axis, I'm basically going to use course name, and on the y-axis I have the capacity for each of the courses and the enrollment. So so you can think of it as one point on the x-axis. There are going to be two values, so that I can know what was the capacity, how much was the enrollment. Okay, so we set up our course list and then convert it into JSON, just as we did for the previous case with just courses alone, and we return the JSON data, which, as I said, conforms to a string. Okay, so that's the next part. The final part is, of course, the JavaScript itself. Okay, and once you have set this up, you should test it. You should test this JSON, is it coming properly? So what you should go is, I'm just going to say start without debugging, and then you should test it, because without that you don't know if you're getting the JSON data or not. So this is in my manual course, so it's okay, and I call this get courses data for chart. No input parameter. In the previous case, we were getting a department ID as an input parameter. In this case, no input parameters. Okay, and you can see the JSON that is generated. And again, going back to Leon's question, name value pairs. So the first row. So this is the entire JSON data. Within that, within whatever you have within curly braces refers to one object or one row. So up to here. So for each row or each object, course name comes as the colon separates the name from the value. So course name, advanced IT, capacity 45. You can see the integers are not within quotes. So while anything that's a string is within double quotes. Enrollment is again. So these are the three name value pairs that constitute each row or each object. Then the comma to separate one row or object from the next one. The next one starts here. So you should be become very familiar with JSON. I hope by now it's not obviously one of the reasons in the industry has adopted this is it's a relatively simple format. Okay, so now that we have confirmed that this is working, the next step is, so our JSON method is working, so always check that. The next is to go into our JavaScript, and remember we have been putting our JavaScript under www.root.js folder, and I have my courses enrollment chart is what I called it. You can obviously call it anything you want, as long as it's meaningful. And this part, every document, every web page we are reading, we've pretty much followed this format. And this only requires the AJAX method. Okay, we are not going to use anything else other than the AJAX method. The key is, since we are calling this data from default.cshtml, which is at a very different location, you have to give the full path of where the data is found. The URL has to be the full path. You cannot just say get courses data for chart. You basically have to say manual course get courses data for chart. This is the full controller view. Okay, if you are in the same controller like we were previously with our previous usage of JSON, we were not going out of that controller, but now we are. So we have to give the full path, otherwise it won't retrieve the data. So it's a get method, the data type is JSON. Here, this is basically what's the input parameter. Obviously here, previously we had used the department ID value, but here there is no input parameter. Okay, so we don't have to, so you can see that we don't have an ID being referenced. Either previously we had like the department ID, that where are we getting the target, the department target, the course target. We don't have that here. Okay, so no data, this is no input parameter. Okay, and then if the data is retrieved from this method, the JSON, if it's successful, then we are saying we are going to call a function, pass the data. We are going to pass the data to a function called create. The function is essentially the equivalent of a method. Create line chart and pass it the parameter of all the data that you have retrieved. Okay, so this is basically where you are retrieving the data. The second part is where you're constructing the chart. So I've created a function below that. A function is called create line chart. It takes this data as its parameter input value. To differentiate, I called it input data. And then I construct the chart. I prefer having the curly braces down here. That's my own preference because it sort of gives me a sense of where a particular body begins and ends. So this function begins here, goes all the way down here. And I'm setting up this chart. It's this new basically it's saying whenever you see new, it's obviously creating an object. So it's a line chart, a Morris line chart, and the element, remember I told you this is the equivalent of the ID. So your element is where it's going to display. And we said the ID is chart. So that's what you're indicating here. The data that you're using is the input data that you retrieved through the JSON method. The x-axis value is course name. And again, that is this column from JSON, okay? Capacity and enrollment are the y-axis values, okay? And they are these two columns, okay? So all of these need to get connected for the chart to actually work. The labels that we are showing are capacity and enrollment. So this is the values, and these are the labels that we will show. And this is for some visual effects. So as you hover over it, it shows up. So if I were to go back to the view, so if you were to hover over those points, you can see it shows you the labels with the values. So that's what this refers to. However, resizing the chart we are saying is true so that it fits. So remember what we said in our default view, we want the height to be 250 pixels. So by allowing the resizing to be true, and parse time is set to false. I've been trying to understand what this is doing, and I'm not entirely clear, but when I remove this attribute, if I remove it, the chart does not display. So it is doing something which I'm not entirely sure what it is trying to do. So obviously it's referring to some time element. Maybe if it's a time series that you want to chart as a line graph, maybe it might parse time. But if you leave this property or attribute out, the chart doesn't display, so you have to include this parse time as being false. Okay, so that is pretty much the main parts. Again, as I said, this is for those of you who have been exploring. On Tuesday, I will go over this code all over again. Maybe I will send this in the email for those of you who want to explore. Maybe I'll just send the PDF of the document that I've used for those who are exploring, because I didn't go over the code line by line. I'll do that and send the document over. Okay, that's pretty much the discussion of the Morris chart line graph.